Good morning. My name is Julie Madden. I am on staff here at St. Joan of Arc, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you, wherever you are on your journey of encounter this morning. So our scripture this morning in the gospel is about judgment, judgment of a man born blind because he was born blind, and judgment of Jesus because he dared to heal this man on the Sabbath. And so we look at our own world and we look at the judgment that is being forced upon immigrants, asylees, refugees, both documented and particularly undocumented. And our guest, I'm going to do it again, John. I can't talk about John Keller without weeping. No one in this state has done more to serve those impacted by our broken immigration system, and no one has done more to try and heal that broken system than John Keller. His work and his witness as the executive director of the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota is tireless. And we are so proud and blessed to welcome as our speaker our very own John Keller.
Good morning, Joan of Arc. I think I got most of my crying out through the 9 o'clock hour, thanks to Julie and the beautiful Mass. I want to just, first of all, thank St. Joan of Arc for being my home, for being my family's home for many, many years, for your leadership in all things social justice. And it's such a great privilege to be back with an opportunity and the honor to speak to many of you who are my role models. Julie called me this week and we were talking about what I could talk about. We spent about 45 minutes on the phone and came up with about 8 subjects. And then she sent me an email and she said, John, remember you have 13 minutes. I am happy to say for those of you who were not at the 9 o'clock, which I assume is most of you, Father Jim came up to me before this Mass started and said, we'll show the video of the Archbishop next week. You have a few more minutes. So I've been impressed so far with the Archbishop. I meant no offense. But I am happy for a couple more minutes. So here at St. Joan of Arc, I think of St. Joan of Arc as the exciting, radical, engaged side of the Catholic Church that brings me here, I think that brings many of you here. And so let's start with some grounding in where that comes from and for today's conversation. In Exodus, we're told that you shall not oppress or afflict a resident alien, for you were once aliens residing in Egypt. In Matthew, we're told, for I was once hungry and you gave me food, I was thirsty and you gave me drink, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was a young man in Peru in the late 80s, and I had the amazing fortune to meet Father Gustavo Gutierrez, one of the founders of Liberation Theology, and that the core of his interpretation of the preferential option for the poor was the belief that we, when we stand in solidarity with the poor, we're meant to also stand against inhumane structures that create and perpetuate poverty. And finally, Pope Francis reminded us just last month. He had this to say about the anti-immigrant and anti-refugee moment we're living. Quote, faced with this kind of rejection, rooted ultimately in self-centeredness and amplified by populist rhetoric, what's needed is a change of attitude to overcome indifference, to counter fears with a generous approach of welcoming for those who knock upon our doors. Julie asked me to touch on how rejection, self-centeredness, and anti-immigrant rhetoric has manifested itself. After 18 months of consistent campaigning with anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, anti-Mexican, scapegoating of immigrants and refugees as criminals and terrorists, in late January, on the 25th and 27th, 3 executive orders were issued. A few of the changes that came about or announced in those orders are the following. A $23 billion wall is to be built on the southern border. 15,000 additional agents for ICE and Border Patrol are to be hired. Everyone without proper immigration status has now become a priority. No need for a conviction, no need for even charges to be brought against you. Sanctuary cities are to be defunded. Local police are to be deputized to carry out civil immigration enforcement. People from 7 Muslim countries, wholesale, with no particularized suspicion except their citizenship and the fact that they're Muslim, are deemed to be a threat to U.S. security, banned immediately from returning or coming in the first place, even the elderly and even children. And all refugees from all over the world for 120 days were banned from entering. In addition, the U.S.'s modest commitment to resettle 110,000 refugees for the year was reduced to 50,000. 60,000 human beings trapped in some of the most dangerous, hopeless places across the planet will not be coming. Many of them have been in those camps for years. How have these policies impacted real people's lives? Julie asked me. Undocumented Latino parents whose average length of residency now in the United States is approximately 15 years, fear sending their children to school, and fear going to work. One of the top requests that we get at the Immigrant Law Center is to help people set up powers of attorney and guardianship for their U.S. citizen children in the event they're deported. One of our clients, a father and a husband, is undocumented. He's got 4 U.S. citizen children. He's been here more than 20 years. He came as a child himself. He's active in his church, in his community. His employer has written letters begging immigration to allow him to stay. He's paid his state taxes and federal taxes for years. In 2014, we helped him get prosecutorial discretion after he was pulled over for a traffic stop. He's got to check in quarterly with his ICE agent. His first check-in after the new administration, the agent told him that he has until May 1st to show up with a plane ticket. He was also informed that it's up to him if he chooses to take his 4 U.S. citizen children to one of the most dangerous countries on the planet, Guatemala. His story, without exaggeration, is being repeated every day across the United States. Another real person, a real family impacted is Mushkad. I had the great honor of getting to know her and her mother. Mushkad is a 4-year-old child. Her story was on the front page of the February 3rd Washington Post. I encourage you to look it up. She was left behind when her mother had to make a terrible choice about coming to the United States with her 2 older daughters and leaving behind her months-old baby, who was not on the refugee petition because she was a newborn, or staying behind and starting the process over. She was informed, the mother, that if she came to the US within a short amount of time, she'd be able to bring her child that she left with a friend. 4 years went by. A few days before she was to get on a plane, the January 27th executive order was issued. I have a photo of young Mushkad at the airport with her guardian who was bringing her. She had a new dress. She had her hair done. She'd gotten fresh henna for her mom. She was denied a boarding pass because the Border Patrol said that they could not guarantee her entry under the executive order. She was 4. I had the good fortune to meet her mother at a press conference 2 days after the order with Senators Franken and Klobuchar, and I learned that she did not have an attorney. It's been one of the most amazing opportunities of my legal career to help her. We quickly assembled the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, the Center for New Americans at the University of Minnesota Law School, the Dorsey Law Firm, Minnesota's largest law firm, and the 2 US senators and their staff. And we worked a large number of hours over the next 5 or 6 days, preparing litigation, working every possible channel through the bureaucracy. And I'm pleased to say that Mushkad was reunited with her mother, was allowed to come in. Mushkad was one of 2 people that an exception was made for during that first week of the ban. 2 people. It took phone calls from our senators to the Secretary of Homeland Security, ultimately, to allow a 4-year-old child into the United States. We took the case, obviously, because there was a need, but more importantly, to demonstrate the absurdity of what we were seeing play out. I was given Kleenex by the 9 o'clock reader. You would think I would know to bring my own. The ripple effects of taking on that case are amazing and are about what we're about at this time, which is responding in ways that are different and greater than the ways we've been responding to date. What we are facing is not normal, and our response cannot be normal. As I mentioned, Mushkad's story and her photographs of her mother and older sisters were on the front page of the Washington Post. And about 4 days later, when Secretary Kelly was questioned about the executive order, reference was made to this little girl and how our security was improved or not improved by denying her reunification with her mother and sisters. Mushkad's story was included in the Minnesota Attorney General's complaint in the Washington litigation. And that Washington and Minnesota litigation brought about the end of the executive order version 1.0. To me, Mushkad's story is about what we're up against. It's the story of one of the most powerless, vulnerable human beings who so easily could still be in Uganda. But it's also the power of getting organized, of resisting, of using every tool we have to bring the powers of the Constitution, the powers of human kindness, and the powers of the general public to understand that a response is required. We're living in hard and dark and difficult times, but I'm also here to say that I'm seeing amazing light, engagement, and the desire to step up. A few of those examples. The DACA program for young dreamers remains in place, even though there's a draft executive order to terminate it. That means 6,000 Minnesotans and 750,000 dreamers nationwide can continue to go to school, can continue to drive safely, and can continue to build better lives for themselves and their families. We've seen teams of lawyers at our nation's airports ensuring due process in our own land for people from abroad. Our independent judiciary, as I mentioned, in great contrast to the rhetoric, struck down not once, but now several times, a policy based on a campaign promise and devoid of constitutional muster. If you have a moment and you're tech savvy, I encourage you to read the Minnesota Attorney General's complaint. It's on our Facebook page and website. It is profound. I love the law, especially when it works to our advantage. Other signs of light. I've seen, as you have, Muslims take out full-page ads in support of Jews who are the subject of hate crimes. I've seen volunteers and donations rise to levels that I've never seen. And I see and can point you to public polling that shows that the American public still supports fixing our broken immigration system for long-term undocumented and dreamers in the ratios of 62 to 72%. So, what can you do, was the other question Julie asked me. I spoke recently to the Sisters of St. Joseph, and I gave them a list of 8 things. Because of time, I'll give you 3, but I'm happy to share the other 5. Educate yourself. This is not a time to say immigration is too complicated. It's not. It's complicated, but most people know very little about immigration. Plug in, expand your power through your networks. If you don't have one, St. Joan of Arc is working on very powerful things. There's a session right after Mass today. St. Joan's efforts to welcome the stranger, to lead in providing sanctuary here. Ask yourself and help be part of the answer of what should St. Joan of Arc's response, one of the leading social justice faith communities in the state, look like at this moment and for the foreseeable future. Encounter is number 2. Jews, Muslims, Christians, non-believers have all found new ways to support one another. Most people in the Twin Cities, like myself, have roots in farming or in greater Minnesota. Encounter also means reaching back and having conversations, cross-pollinating your understanding, your experiences with immigrants and refugees and people who are different with our very roots that don't understand and are afraid. And finally, raise your voices. We've seen just this week the power of our voices being raised. Raise your voices for policies that are fair at the state level and at the federal level. In Minnesota, support a clean Real ID bill that does not prevent undocumented immigrants from getting driver's licenses. And at the federal level, adopt a congressional district that needs you. The numbers 2, 3, 6, and 7 come to mind. For starters, you can sign up for action alerts at the doors from Immigrant Law Center. To conclude, I was lucky enough as a 19-year-old at St. John's University to study Gandhi and other peacemakers under the guidance of an old monk. Gandhi was a Hindu devotee who dedicated his life to satya, the study of truth. He believed that love, respect, and truth were the underpinnings of all religions and the basic foundation of how to lead a moral life. As he famously once said when asked if he was a Hindu, quote, "Yes, I am. I'm a Christian. I'm also a Muslim, a Buddhist, and a Jew." May we all rise in these challenging times to build light and hope through embracing our common humanity, to intentionally encounter and welcome the stranger. Thank you, St. Joan of Arc.